I have worked the Hargrove estate for 11 years, and in that time I have learned that the grandest rooms in the world belong, really, to the people who clean them. We move through those spaces before the guests arrive, and after they leave, and we know every scratch on the wainscoting, every loose caster on the serving cart, every note the old Bosendorfer grand throws sharp in damp weather. What we do not do, what I had never seen done in 11 years, is sit down at it. The night I am thinking of was a charity gala. 60 guests in black tie, the kind of evening Mr. Hargrove arranged twice a year to remind the city who he was. The ballroom had been dressed to its finest, white hydrangeas in crystal towers, candles multiplied in the long mirrors, a string of footlights gilding the parquet gold. My job that evening was the drinks circuit. A circuit I could have walked blind. I knew which corner Colonel Ambrose would claim. I knew which cluster of gentlemen near the fireplace would hold their glasses longest. And I knew that the Bosendorfer, as always, would sit untouched against the far wall like a piece of very expensive furniture. The pianist, Mr. Hargrove had hired, sent a message at 7:30. A family matter, the note said. He would not be coming. I was at the far end of the room when I heard Hargrove call for Nadia. She was one of our newer staff, had joined us perhaps 8 months before, a quiet young woman with a habit of setting glasses down so carefully they barely made a sound. She crossed the room and stood before him, with her serving tray held in both hands, and he looked her over briefly the way a man looks at a door that needs fixing. "The pianist has canceled," he said, not unkindly, but not particularly kindly either. "I need something at the piano to fill the room, background music, something soft, nothing showy, nothing complicated, just enough to cover the silence while my guests settle." He glanced toward the Bosendorfer as though directing a delivery. "Can you manage that?" I remember the pause. I remember the way one or two nearby guests half-turned at the mention of background music, the faint curl of amusement at the corner of a woman's mouth, the implicit joke of it, the help pressed into service. I remember thinking Nadia would demur, would explain she was not a pianist, and the evening would move on. She said, "Yes, Mr. Hargrove." She set her tray on the side table, smoothed the front of her uniform once, and walked to the piano. A few guests watched her, with the idle attention people give to something that does not concern them. A man near the fireplace went on with his sentence. Colonel Ambrose's wife leaned toward her companion to finish a story. Nadia adjusted the bench, only slightly, only a centimeter, sat down with a composure I have since thought about many times, and placed her hands above the keys without yet touching them. There was a single, brief stillness in which I noticed, from across the room, how her wrists were held, low, quiet, as if she had all the time in the world. Then her left hand came down. The opening of the ballade. I know now what it is, though I did not know it that night, arrives like a question asked in a low, certain voice. A single rising phrase, bare and unhurried. That seems to ask something of the room before the room is ready to answer. I heard it from 20 feet away and felt, quite unexpectedly, that my feet had stopped moving. The phrase resolved. The right hand entered, and the melody came, cantabile, singing wider than the ballroom seemed able to hold. It was not background music. It had never been going to be background music. I understood that within 4 bars, and I believe everyone else in the room understood it at roughly the same moment, because the conversation near the fireplace did not stop all at once, so much as it simply ran out, the way water runs off the edge of a table, quietly and without ceremony. I stood where I was and did not pour a single drink for the next 12 minutes. The piece moved through its early measures with a tenderness that was almost unbearable. The kind of musical beauty that does not ask you to be impressed but only to be present, only to stay still and let it work. I watched Nadia's face in the mirror above the piano and saw nothing theatrical in it. Her eyes moved with the music. She swayed once, fractionally, on a turn of phrase, and there was in that small motion more feeling than I had seen in an entire season of the estate's hired entertainment. The ballade, I have since learned, does not stay tender. It builds by degrees, over the course of its middle pages, from the lyrical into something more urgent, and then urgent into something close to terrible, a beauty that will not be contained. I did not know the piece that night, and so I felt each turn arrive without preparation, without the comfort of anticipation, which is perhaps the finest way to encounter it. When the first great climax crested and Nadia's left hand drove down into a bass so full it seemed to shake the candles, I heard a woman behind me draw a breath and hold it, and I realized my own jaw was clenched. I looked around the room. Colonel Ambrose had set down his glass. His wife had her fingers pressed to her lips. A younger man, the kind who at these events talks through everything, stood by the mantelpiece with his hands at his sides, quite motionless, his earlier conversation apparently forgotten permanently. At the edge of my vision I could see Mr. Hargrove, who had moved, I do not know when, from the center of the room to a spot perhaps 6 feet from the piano, where he stood alone, with one hand resting on the back of a chair, watching Nadia play. The final pages of the ballade are a coda of remarkable restraint after the storm that precedes them. The melody returning, changed, quieter, as if it has been through something and come out the other side. Nadia took them at a tempo so considered that I could feel each phrase being measured out, each note a decision. The last chord was not struck so much as placed, both hands descending together, holding, the sound opening into the room like a door swung wide. Then it stopped. What followed was the most complete silence I have ever heard inside a building, not the silence of inattention, the silence of a room that has been so thoroughly held that it does not know yet how to move. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Then Colonel Ambrose began to clap, and every hand in the room followed. The sound that filled the ballroom a moment later was not polite. It was the sound of 60 people who had been caught off guard by something larger than the occasion they had dressed for, and who were responding with the only thing they had. Several people stood. Then most of them stood. I stayed where I was, because I found I could not move, and because there was something in that moment I did not want to alter by doing anything at all. Nadia sat at the piano for a moment after the chord had died, her hands resting in her lap. Then she rose, turned, and stood with a simple, unaffected composure, as though she had only done what she had been asked. Which in one sense she had. Mr. Hargrove crossed the room to her. He was a man who did very little without an awareness of how he appeared doing it, and I watched him consider, briefly, the 11 feet between himself and the piano. Then he walked them without any performance at all, and when he reached her, he extended his hand. "I owe you an apology," I heard him say. "I told you to fill the silence." He paused. "You did considerably more than that." Nadia shook his hand. "You needed something for the room," she said. "I gave you what I had." I have turned that answer over many times since. It was not modest, not in any false sense. It was simply accurate. She had read the room the way only someone who has spent years serving it could, had understood what it needed, and had given it, without ceremony, without permission beyond the 4 words Hargrove had spoken. "Sit down and play." I carried trays for the rest of that evening and spoke to no one about what I had witnessed, because there are some things that need time before they become words. What I knew, walking out to my car that night, under the same cold sky I had walked under 100 times before, was that I had been in the presence of something real, and that the room which had let a young woman cross it to the piano with polite condescension had risen at the last, without any condescension at all. Some halls take years to earn, some are given in a single evening. Nadia had played the room like she'd always owned it.